with me today. I grew up about 20 minutes from here, so I'm a Chicago kid. I grew up by Wrigley, and I flew in early this morning from Boston. So it's a real honor to be here, and really to hear everyone else's insights as well. I'd like to just super quick give a real quick intro into my background, touch real quick on some of the key takeaways that I've learned. I've been an entrepreneur for about a year and a half, let's call it 2 years. So, many of the insights that the more kind of veteran, more senior individuals who have spoken, especially the ones that I've heard since I've been here this morning, oftentimes those are mistakes and kind of takeaways that they have, that they've experienced that, I put away in my own kit bag. So in 2 years, I've made a ton of mistakes. It's been a great learning experience, and I hope to share some of those with you if I can ever be helpful, not just here today, but even into the future. I'm happy to hand out my personal cell, anything like that. So real quick on my background. So again, I grew up here, son of a pastor. After high school, went out to West Point, graduated in 2006. I studied economics there. Joined my first unit in Hawaii. We went to Iraq for 15 months. I have a fun little story I'll tell real quickly about that. Got back from Iraq, got diagnosed with late-stage cancer unexpectedly from burn pit exposure to hazardous waste in the areas where we lived. So I came back here to the area, had a fairly straightforward cancer treatment process. At that point, I was way off my career cycle, so someone told me about something called the GMAT. I went and took the GMAT with no eyebrows. I did okay. Ended up getting out of the Army and starting business school at Harvard. So I started RallyPoint with another veteran. He's 7 years older than me. Some of you actually know him, Enon Weiss. I started the company with him just before my first year. We raised a seed round, had a couple other points of success, at least as we had defined it, and I dropped out. So I would have graduated last year, but instead I've been doing this full time for about a year and a half. So, let's see. Right.
Let's see if this works.
Oh, there it goes.
All right, do you want me to keep this blank, or is it good right now?
I'm not sure. I'm just going to take this down. Which are we looking at? This one here?
Yeah. So you can control. So that's just interface. Yep.
And this is behind me?
Yep, it's right there.
Okay, great. So real quick story. Someone told me I was supposed to tell a story if I get people after lunch. So when my unit got to Iraq, we were ripping with a unit from Fort Hood. RIP is relief in place. Basically, you hand off, authority over time to people. So we went on one of our first patrols, and so I was a young lieutenant, had an interpreter with me, right? So many of you will relate to this. You go out to a village or a town, right, and off you go with your platoon of guys, and someone comes up to you from the area and says, "I need to talk." Great, okay, let's talk, right? So grab my interpreter and start talking to the guy. Well, what's going on? How are you? It's nice to meet you. Well, I know where they have the IEDs, right? So a fairly common thing. So I said, who, right? So through the interpreter, lots of back and forth. He says, Al-Qaeda. I said, okay, great. And so this is the point where it kind of took a turn for me, because in Arabic, the word for where in English sounds like when. Okay, sounds like when. So the next piece of information was where the IEDs were, right? So I asked the interpreter, where, right? So he turns, he says, when, to the individual there, right? So I said, no, I'm talking about, where are the IEDs? Where did you see them? So he turned, he said, okay, I understand, sir. Hold on. When, right? So it kind of went back and forth. At a certain point, I didn't end up realizing until later that really I had, not sufficiently prepared for that. Fortunately, it's a fun story. Nothing serious happened in that type of situation. So again, I just say that to circle back to the fact that I hope that a few things I say here today, may have a positive impression on some of you that may be considering entrepreneurship in the future. So a little bit here about RallyPoint. So myself and my co-founder, we started RallyPoint. Really, the genesis was from a few things that we had experienced personally while we were in the military. And you will see as I describe it a little bit that publications like Forbes or whatever it might be have called us LinkedIn on steroids for the military, and what is that good for? I don't know. So in this case, we had a few different pain points that resonated really well with us. Number one, that people in the military have very little ability to influence their own careers. Knowledge over time is lost. It's kind of sacrificed. It's really disparate. Units are disparate. People are disparate. The military is all over the place. People move and they churn. And actually, relationships typically tend to not be leveraged, whether for mentorship, knowledge advancement, career networking, whatever it might be. So the way that RallyPoint works, and I'll show you a few things here, but the way that RallyPoint works is according to the most complicated hierarchical organization in the United States, and that's the Department of Defense. And so what we did is, in database work and things like that, we actually built the Department of Defense from scratch. So this is actually the most comprehensive organizational structure of the Department of Defense in the world. And so what we do is, we have that, it's fully interactive, and we layer on top of that someone's social graph inside the military, right? So, I met Ben, a year and a half ago, right? Ben knows a ton of people in the Navy. I was an Army guy, right? Ben knows a ton of people. Why would I ever know these people, right? As some of them are in the Pentagon, wherever they might be. Why on earth would I ever have an interaction with them? And the answer is I wouldn't. And the same goes the other way. So right now, if Ben is connected to me on RallyPoint, which he is right now, I actually can connect Ben very, very deep into tons and tons and tons of different Army units around the world. So I'll show you how that works. And then I'll talk about a couple of the use cases that we've seen here. Before I dive in, a couple of data points for you. So we are a for-profit company. We started the company and launched the site about 10 and a half, 11 months ago. About 1 out of every 10 people in the U.S. Army right now uses the site. We have somewhere between 5 or 6% of the entire Department of Defense on the site. We recently broadened to include veterans. We had a lot of pushback, and veterans say, like, what's going on? Why can't I be on here? So what we do is we capture veterans according to what they're doing right now. Of course, it's important what they used to do in the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard and things like this. But the important thing with veterans is that we capture such granular metadata about these individuals, and they actually work, in DARPA. They work at Goldman, or they work at DuPont, or they work anywhere, or they're self-employed, or they're looking for work, right? This is what defines them right now, and we create interactions very deeply and accurately according to that. So let's dive in really quickly here. This is actually a public-facing version of the technology right here. You can all go here if you want to. Just RallyPoint.com/universe. So this is sterilized unless individuals choose to make their information public. So what you're actually going to see here is that I'm going to be unfolding. I'm going to choose the Army. It's what I know. I'm actually going to unfold the organizational structure of the Army, so the largest branch. So what we're doing is we're actually clicking down into the superstructure of the Army. So you see, there's certainly well over 1,000 people in the Army who are on the site verifiably. And so let's go down into ForceCom. It's a large command within the Army. So we're actually following the breadcrumbs down to a specific unit. If you need to find a mentor somewhere, I can say a use case for a lot of young officers is, man, I've been busting my butt. I feel like I'm a great fit for some job, or I'm at the career course. I really need to get a company command in a brigade that's deploying next year. Who do I know, right? So you always kind of go through this thought experiment in the military, like who do I know when you're coming up for orders? And this helps you visually understand that. And so I'll finish here. We'll go down to 18th Airborne Corps. Here's one of the stored units of the Army called the 82nd Airborne. And we'll actually just unfold one of these brigade combat teams. So what you see here, all the green dots in this case, because this is the public-facing version. So these are all the places where we have RallyPoint members right now, members of these units. In this case, it's probably a lot of junior officers, senior NCOs, even lower enlisted, and things like this. But basically, it's a way for you to, fold out the types of individuals that you want to get an introduction to inside the Department of Defense. And so, what I'll do here for a second, I think it's over here on the side of my screen. I don't know where it went. I have the logged in version right here.
What's that?
You just it's pop up on top. You see right there. So yeah, it's above that upper right hand line at the top.
I do not. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. There you go. So you.
I need to. I want to go on this one.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Over it goes.
There you go.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So, so this is my logged in version of the site right now, and I'll go down through the same steps right now. You can see that we have some yellow circles in here as well. Go down through the same process. I'm a PC guy, it's a lot faster with the little Mac thing. So here we go, over we go. Down to 18th Airborne Corps, then we'll go down to the 82nd Airborne. Again, in this case, what you're looking at is Aaron's first and second order professional network inside a very, very complicated hierarchical organization. That in fact, many people in the Army don't even know what the Army looks like. Right? It's not their fault. And to be sure, people in the Army don't know what the Marine Corps looks like. And so there's a certain benefit to individuals and human capital and talent in an organization, we think, to understanding where you fit, such that you can enable horizontal collaboration in real time with each other, and vertical collaboration, knowledge retention, and sharing. And so anyway, what you're looking at here, the purpose here is that I just took you into the 3rd Brigade Combat Team in the public-facing version, right? And you saw all these green dots. I actually don't know anyone in 3rd Brigade Combat Team. There's like 5,000 people in this unit. Aaron, I actually am not connected with anyone there. I actually don't know anyone there. But in fact, what you see is I have 10 second-order contacts in 3rd Brigade Combat Team. So I actually do have great relationships in there, if only I knew who they were, and now I do. And so many of you are familiar with the idea of a second-order contact. I obviously did not like invent this idea, right? So, but you know, the power here is that you actually are able to go down to organizations. You know, in this case, you're looking at organizations that maybe have 120 guys in it, something like this. So let's say that for whatever reason, I'm looking for an intro to a certain unit. Maybe it's a sister unit and things like this. Of course, this is how you would use that type of thing. So I'll show you a few more things about this really quickly. So what you've looked at, am I doing this? Yeah. All right. So what I've shown you is proximity based on your discrete, fairly rigid position in a very complicated, kind of unusual, abstract organization, right? But now let's just scrap that and say, like, who cares about the organization? I just want to know my geographic proximity because there's so many impactful relationships that happen because of physical proximity. Obviously, here we are, right? So let's scrap all that, and I'm going to largely stay in the Army here, sorry. So we're just going to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So here, you see we have about 2,500 people from a 2-star down to a new private, a new saw gunner, something like this, who are at Fort Bragg right now, regardless of what they're doing. There actually are some Marines at Fort Bragg. They're in detachments and some Air Force personnel and things like this, right? So fine. So they're at Fort Bragg right now. I actually would like to see anyone who's ever done anything at Fort Bragg. I don't care when it was, and I don't even care if they work at Goldman and they're a banker now. So let's go here, and let's see that, let's see here, many different types of individuals. Some are self-employed, some are still in. Many individuals are still in. You have, let's just randomly pick an individual here. Colonel Bob Micaleer, he's an artillery officer. That's awesome. That's how I was. Right now, he's a Chief Congressional Operations Liaison. What is this? Hold on, come on. So he's at the Office of the Chief Legislative Liaison, which is part of the command offices of Headquarters Department of the Army. He's at the Pentagon, and he was at Fort Bragg from 96 to 99, right? And so you actually create this repository of very, very actionable metadata that defines this professional community that is incredibly internally loyal. And so one of the, this right here is one of our members' favorite features right here. This really was like the kind of genesis of RallyPoint. And like many companies, you kind of have a personal experience, and you're like, this stinks, and I want to like do something about it, right? So in this case, I was, a senior O2, and it's kind of rhythmic. It's part of your career. I'm coming up on orders, and I'm freaking out because I know I don't really have much say in what's going on. So I write to branch, right? Many of us have been through this. You already know what I'm going to say. I write to branch. Sir, I'm coming up on orders in 6 months. What options do you have for me? He said, great to hear from you. Options 1, 2, and 3, these are the options, right? And we understand, I'm not being vindictive, like I'm not, but we understand why this works, right? It's the manage of talent inside the organization is very centralized. It does have a reason, to some extent. But in this case, like many of you, I said there's no possible way that these are the only 3 options when the Department of Defense publicly is in 160 countries around the world, right? Like there's no possible way that I'm going to Fort Polk or I'm going to Fort Irwin, right? Everyone in the Army's laughing, right? No one wants to go there, right? So anyway, what this does is, members, we capture, and this is gated access, it's secured. You're seeing everything because you're on my administrative account. But we capture many pieces of data that are okay according to the DoD social media policy for people to put on the internet, right? So, which is probably going to be question 1 from someone. So we capture PCS dates, and some branches don't say PCS. PCS is when you're doing a change of station. So you're coming up on orders, now you go, right? So in this case, we have, what we've been able to create is a theoretical universe of PCS options that in theory ought to be available to someone just like you at any month, year in the future. Because it's just circular. Because when Aaron's done being a company commander, the company commander job doesn't go away. Someone else comes in. He's company commander, right? And so there has to be some kind of circular, kind of virtuous engine here. And so what you're looking at here, I just kind of artificially, I put in a PCS date for myself of September 2014. So it's very common for our members to know, 2-3 years out when they're moving. I am September 2014. What you're looking at here is all these different types of options. That actually, you're seeing a ton of O3s. You're seeing a lot of like captain's bars because of the criteria I put in here. So I wanted to match my rank and my branch. I'm going to look for something branch immaterial, right? What you're actually seeing is a very accurate representation of all the different PCS options. I can keep going. I can keep going. All the different PCS options in the Army for someone just like me around the world that ought to be available to someone like me. My favorite part about this is that the branch managers at Human Resources of the military actually don't originate the manning requirements. And many people probably know that, right? Like the people in the middle where it's centralized actually don't know what units need, right? So they sit in the middle as the node, but the units know who they need better than anybody. You have the chiefs up there, right? They're at the one shop, and they send these projections to Human Resources and say, we need to fill these slots, and just send us somebody, right? So the beauty here is that you actually can create, it is appropriate, you can create a liberalized population where senior leaders who write us about this all the time, senior leaders actually want to be able to influence who comes to their units. So if you're a senior leader in, at Procter & Gamble, right? You're a senior leader, and you're going to get evaluated, and at some point, and your staff is incredibly important. Why would you not have any say at all into who you get, right? And so many of the same opportunities become possible here. So I don't want to overshoot my little portion that I've allocated to the demonstration here. How am I doing on time, Ben?
You got about 10 minutes.
Okay, all right, so I'll do the final, whoops, let me move it over. I'll spend about 30 seconds on this piece right here. This is something that we just started about a week ago, just to do some quick experimentation with something. Is anyone here familiar with the website called Quora? Quora, awesome website. So Quora is basically incredibly sophisticated knowledge management, and it applies influence and things like that to people's answers and things like that. So we built our own internal knowledge management system where anyone in the military can actually weight answers and say, this is a crummy answer, sorry. And this is getting voted down. And so what happens is, just to test it, we just had a couple people throw some questions out there. In this case, this E4 in the Army came on and said, the title of his question, I don't know why he titled it like this, but the title of his question was, where do I go from here? And it's really serious. And he went on to ask, I'm not getting anywhere with my battalion retention NCO. Maybe I should just get out. I don't have a plan. Maybe I should just get out, become a civilian. That's a huge problem, right? That's not good, and nothing good is going to come from that. And so this individual who's here at Fort Bliss, his specialist promotable, right? First of all, his question got voted up because people said, great question. And maybe I can even answer this, but I want to put this on the radar of other people on the site. I don't care if it's a 2-star, and I don't care if it's a former E4 promotable who works at Pinterest in California now, right? So what ended up happening here is you had, within an hour or two, you had sergeant majors over in Germany. You had career counselors, E7s, E8s around the Army. You had individuals from the Marine Corps saying, these are my ideas. I'm not really sure if this works in the Army the right way, but these are my ideas. And as these individuals are quickly being pulled into this conversation from around the world, individuals are voting answers higher and higher and higher. And so, in the interest of time, I'm not going to kind of dive into a ton of other things here. But generally speaking, this is a lot of the product right here. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this. I'd love some questions, if I could be helpful at all, on any kind of lessons from entrepreneurship. Go ahead.
I got a question that kind of relates to the ideation topic that some of us are working on creating a TCS marketplace. It sounds like you invented about half of what we thought of yesterday. So my question is, how does this, so I've got all this great information. How do I actually turn that into an assignment swap or something like that? So I did some homework last night, dug around and looked at some doctrine. It appears that the Army has a assignment swap policy. How does that actually, how does what RallyPoint does, how does that interface with those policies that currently exist?
Yep.
How does it actually work?
Yeah, great question. So there's two parts to the answer. The question is, yes, it already has worked. It already has worked. There's been we've seen a ton of junior officers connecting with 06s who have indicated that they're going to brag in the future, and they're taking command of a brigade. So we've seen a lot of that happening, and we have in private gotten notes from people saying, I just got a by name request to this unit. They're really like the glory, right? Your moment of glory is like, hopefully you can get a by name request. Like if you can't, you can't. But at least people should have the opportunity to say, sir, I see you're going into command. I see this job is available. Just consider me. Like, this is what I've done. These are my contacts. If you don't want me, that's okay. But it's really exciting for people to be able to do that. So it ultimately results in a by name request one way or another. And I'll add to that some of our most active users are people in human resources of the branches who write us about, can you put this in here? I'd like to use this. So.
If you can answer this, but assuming your market is finite, and so your advertising dollars are potentially low, how are you monetizing this?
Yeah, great question. So the question is about advertising and monetization. So we have not yet begun to be made it a priority to significantly monetize. So we do have investors from the Northeast, and we're finishing up a venture capital round right now. So about advertising, which in theory is one way to monetize something. We're not huge believers in the absolute power of advertising in this case. I think you need to have such massive volume. I think that type of thing in the future, I think, could be interesting. So, advertising for us, I would see, coming up down the road. There are other opportunities for monetization that we are interested in. The one thing that we never will do is just auction off data of the Department of Defense. We will never do that, ever. So never worry about that.
On the topic of data, you're sitting on a huge amount of militarily significant data that I'm sure, there are embassies right now that do this kind of thing, that are not doing it for friendly reasons, and try to understand the network, the structure of foreign military. What kind of resistance have you gotten from the Department of Defense, if any, on this? What kind of pushback from the bureaucracy have you seen?
Great question. So, and that's probably the most significant question that even prospective investors ask who have nothing to do with the military. They say, like, my God, cool, but what if you get shut down, right? We've never pursued a deliberate relationship with the Department of Defense. We love the military, but we innovate so rapidly and have so many different types of updates to the product, like twice a week, that we're not particularly interested right now in having a military voice and how we adapt the product to what people want to use. What we did as far as credibility, which is really important because it's almost more important to have the perception of absolute security, which actually there's no such thing, right? It's almost more important to have the right perception than the actual reality, which of course is important. But the perception in the community, what we found is the highest in the Air Force that you're fairly paranoid about. The perception is incredibly important. So what we did was we ended up, we were blessed to do it. We ended up getting connected with General George Casey, who ran the Iraq War and then ran the entire Army. We got connected with him. We showed him how it worked. It's probably one of the most nervous situations I've ever been in to show him what we had done. He absolutely loved it. He said the military needed this yesterday. We said, who else do you think might find this cool, right? He said, I have a friend of mine, Norton Schwartz, who's getting ready to end his time running the Air Force. We said, that would be great, because Air Force people are running us all the time. So General Norton Schwartz, about a month later, also joined our board of advisors. They're very actively engaged. I'm not putting any words in their mouth. They both absolutely know what the product is, and we feel that that has given us a sufficient, stamp of credibility. Of course, it's very important for us to make the right decisions, though, as far as how we protect the data.
As far as protecting data, have you taken steps to verify identities, like how Airbnb verified identities?
Yeah, great question. So I love the Airbnb story. It's an awesome case to study. So the question's about verifying identities. So what you see here is, Aaron's view of the military and things like that. There's tons of fun little things you can do in there. But what you're seeing is the absolute view of the site. When members come and join the site, they are segregated automatically. And there's very, very strict requirements, very, very advanced requirements for people to move from one section to another. So there are ways that we verify that people not just are who they say they are, but are the status that they say they are. Right? And sometimes people do it on accident. It could be a veteran who's I'm in the military, and then they're not. Right? So you have ways to protect against that. We have really, really advanced. We really follow some of the market-leading procedures that we just kind of keep in-house about how we protect data on the site.
It's coincidental that I'm looking at the map up there in Castro, Belgium. I was stationed there in Shape, Belgium on commemoration in 1968.
Yes.
Yes, the Cream Airport, I left out of Europe.
Perfect. It's almost like I planted that. So we have this individual here. It's a typical user profile. You guys can be happy to check it out. He actually made his profile public. He's in Castel, Belgium, and he works at Shape. Right? So we have a ton of people at Shape, and we actually know people who are coming to Shape in the future. And so what happens is that with any unit, what happens is like Fort Bragg, we had about 150 people that verifiably are going to Fort Bragg in the future, maybe 2 years from now, right? When they put that in, they say, I'm going to Fort Bragg. I'm going in December 2015. Instantly, everyone at Fort Bragg finds out. We apply different weights to things. Like the general probably doesn't really care if, Second Lieutenant Smith is coming to Fort Bragg, right? He's not going to want that. So we apply different weights there and things like that. So you would be the perfect person to be a previous member, because actually what we've seen is colonels connecting with people who are in the platoon or commanding the platoon that they commanded back in the 80s and interacting in that way. I have 1 minute, maybe one more question.
I was just curious as to how much you've connected with people who are making a lot of discussions about the future of Army policy. So I'm thinking Tim King talked with us about this event because I'd imagine that people could say that this is the perfect platform to then leverage whatever policy change they want to see happen. Are you guys taking any sort of stance on these debates, or are you just trying to kind of create this platform and then people can use it for whatever way they use it?
Sure. So great question. We aren't personally involved in the kind of dialogue that continues on. I kind of have my personal opinions about are you kind of yelling into an empty room? And sometimes it kind of like feels like that, and so we tend to not distract ourselves with something, like that. If people ask our input, we would, be happy to contribute that. But in my opinion, it's very unlikely, at least, for quite some time, maybe, when, we acquire, half the military, or whoever the believable population that could use this would be. Maybe then we have the right type of discussion. But it's very unlikely that someone really senior from the military is going to walk in and say like, "Hey, we'd love to plug in, right? We'd love to like plug this into AKO, right?" Because I can tell you, I can literally guarantee you that number one, we wouldn't do that. It probably would destroy the product. You might as well just like dump acid on it, right? Right? I mean, call a spade, okay? So anyway, that's I gotta go. But great question, though. Thank you. Am I out of time? Or?
I think you're done.
All right. Thank you.
All right, we have one last speaker before we break off into our ideation groups. Shawn Maday. You wouldn't mind coming up? Do you have a idea?
Take 5 minutes. Want to set this up?
Chat amongst yourselves if you want.
Take 5.
Yeah, please stay in your seats for 5. But. difficulties, but Shawn Maday is here with us to give us a presentation, and looking forward to it. So Shawn, over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. All right, we'll start out with a joke. This brand new Air Force lieutenant is on his first week of active duty. He goes to the BX one evening. The BX, he sees this shiny metal cylinder on the shelf, right? Picks it up, runs to the BX clerk and says, "What is this? It looks pretty cool." BX clerk says, "Well, that is a thermos." And the lieutenant says, "Well, what's a thermos?" BX attendant says, "Well, a thermos keeps cold things cold and warm things warm." Lieutenant says, "This is awesome, I gotta have it." Buys it, goes to work, gets situated the next morning, and proudly displays the thermos on his desk, right? Lieutenant's boss comes in and says, "Hey, Lieutenant, what you got there?" Lieutenant proudly says, "Sir, that is a thermos. Keeps cold things cold and warm things warm." His boss says, "Well, what do you have in it today, Lieutenant?" Lieutenant proudly says, "Sir, today I have 2 popsicles and a cup of coffee." Took you a second, but you're with me, right? Okay. My name's Shawn Maday. My goal today is just to throw a bunch of ideas at you. I'm not going to be anywhere nearly as motivational or inspirational as BJ. I'm not going to be as informative as Ben. I just want to throw some ideas out there, talk you through some of the world as I've seen it, and hopefully just get some dialogue sparked between us. I've had a lot of different hats in my life. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 13, formed my first legal entity at age 13, had my first successful exit from a business at age 16, sold a business I had started, ran a really successful Tshirt Company, my most successful entrepreneurial endeavor. As a college student, I'll talk you through some of the lessons I learned there. Spent just under 5 years as an Air Force officer, spent a little bit of time as a defense contractor, just about 9 months, which is the most time you can endure that sort of work. And then I've been a Googler for the last 3.5 years. Specifically, I'm a product manager at Google in my current role, meaning I look after a few of our geospatial products. I set the roadmap. My overall goal is to be the advocate for our users. So I go out, talk to users, try to decide which use cases we're gonna solve, which problems we're gonna satisfy, and then set the roadmap, work with the developers to deliver on that promise. I want to begin today, though, by talking you through a kind of just a story, right? And before we do that, if you walk away from here and I've touched on the topics of technological bankruptcy, obfuscated complexity, and ingenuity as innovation, I'll feel I've done my job. But those are just 3 things I want to throw at you, get you thinking about, and hopefully these slides will touch on those topics. So for that story, I want to start talking about the ICE trade. It's kind of an interesting parallel or interesting metaphor for innovation. And I first read about it by Guy Kawasaki. In 2008, he put up his book, Reality Check, and on page 451, he just briefly, for a couple paragraphs, talks about the ICE trade. And it really kind of caught my attention the way he phrased it. So since that time, I've gone back and tried to do a lot of reading, tried to do some independent verification of the claims he made here, and it does seem to be on the level. So I don't know if he actually originated this observation or he just didn't cite his sources. But let's talk a little bit about ICE, okay? Some of it in the back of the room in that cooler with our water. We take it for granted. It's become a commodity in our world today. Well, not so long ago, ICE was really just a condiment of the elite, if you will. Only the elite could get access to it. In the northern latitudes, we could have ICE a few months a year, but often that ICE would melt and go away. And an entire cottage industry came up around ice harvesting, that is going out to lakes and ponds and cutting chunks of ice, shipping those chunks of ice to large major metropolitan areas so that the elite could have some ice in their drink, or they could keep their produce and meat cold. And then this dude, Frederick Tudor, came along, guy in the middle of the screen, classic entrepreneur, has a very classic entrepreneurial tale. At age 22, he's a very bright individual, kind of a whiz kid. At age 22, he is infatuated with ice. Probably not something that would get me excited, but he loved it. And he had this fantasy. He wanted to take this cottage industry of ice harvesting, he wanted to scale it up, and he wanted to take ice to the southern hemisphere where he thought he could sell it for a lot of money. And everybody thought he was crazy. Nobody would lend him the money to do it. He eventually borrowed the money to do it. That didn't go so well, ends up in a debtor's prison, rolls back out, finally gets his ice business off the ground and makes a lot of money, becomes known as the Ice King of the East Coast, makes a ton of money. But what's really interesting about Frederick Tudor's tale is that innovation to him meant very certain things, right? To him it meant a sharper saw, different tooth configurations on the saw. He ends up taking on this partner, Nathaniel Wyeth, and the reason he takes on this partner is because Nathaniel Wyeth took an old plow that they'd used to plow fields and turned it into an ice cutting device. And so that was innovation. That satisfied as innovation for ICE 1.0, as Guy Kawasaki calls it, right? But then what happened, middle of the 1800s, end of the 1800s, ice, the way we generate ice, the way the world made ice, changed, right? All of a sudden we had the artificial production of ice. First patent filed in 1851. All of a sudden these large ice factories start standing up all over the world. Large ice factory, the first big one in the United States was actually in San Antonio, Texas. They built it, this guy, Andrew Mule here, built it because the cattle industry needed a way to preserve their meat while they processed it and got it to market. So all of a sudden, ice factories are the new way we get ice. This is ice 2.0, right? Then, as we all know, we don't order from the ice factory all that often anymore, even though actually commercial ice is still like a $2.5 billion a year business. But ice 3.0 is what we know and love today as the home refrigerator, right? So by the 1920s, this has become ubiquitous. And what's really interesting, the claim that Guy Kawasaki makes, and the claim that I've spent a lot of time researching, and I can't refute, so we're going to say it's fact until otherwise proven otherwise, is that with these three iterations, right, with these three paradigm shifts that the ice industry went through, Frederick Tudor never made the jump to building an ice factory. And none of the ice factories became Whirlpool or Kelvinator or Maytag. So all of these innovations were really housed in their own technological curve as they kind of describe it here. And what's interesting about really looking at this is that the incumbents on these curves were not able to jump to the next curve. They were not able to get to that higher order innovative, if you will, or that higher order of capability that came with the paradigm shift. And so with this as kind of the backdrop, I'll talk you through, well, of course, there was Ice 4.0, which just never caught on, but for really good reason. So with that as the backdrop, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and where I've been. That Tshirt Company I mentioned to you, I started in my dorm room in 2002. My idea at the time, I've always been a technologist, dabbled in technology, kind of had a natural inclination or an aptitude for technology. And so my idea at the time was, I want to make a way that people can get on a website and customize their shirts, right? And so it was mass customization. What we wanted to do was let people pick any shirt they wanted, any color, any style, any design. We'd make it for them, ship it to them in short order. And we were very successful at this. Very quickly, it grew out of my dorm room. We ended up opening a retail store across the street from Michigan State University. It's as I mentioned to you, it's been my most successful entrepreneurial endeavor. Now, we never made the Inc. 500 or the Fortune 500 list, but this was an excellent way for me to experiment with running a business, experiment with entrepreneurship. The company's pivoted a few times, but we're still in business, still very profitable 10 years on. When I entered active duty in 2005, I made a transition from kind of running the day-to-day to just a strategic board position. But this was my incubator for entrepreneurship. This is where I learned to take chances, and this is where I learned to develop product. And when I really boil down my approach to invention or my approach to developing a product, it comes down to these simple 4 steps, right? First is recognize an opportunity. All of us can do that. All of us do that all the time. But what's interesting is most people stop at that first one. They just bitch about what's wrong, and they never make that jump to number 2. Because number 2 is where you actually craft a solution, right? And yes, it can be a grandiose solution that's going to take years and lots of money, but my natural focus is just to go for the minimum viable product. How do we get something to market? How do we launch? Because that's the key. Because once we launch, we can start gathering user data. We can start gathering metrics on how our product or our solution is being implemented. And finally, we can iterate. And iteration is the key. We got to move, we got to change, and we got to adapt because the world is a dynamic and unpredictable place. So, quick anecdote for you, what this meant in the realm of T-shirt. Well, I should say, too, this second step up there, and this was alluded to yesterday, we've talked about it, but there's like these high order innovations, and there's low level kind of innovations. And step 2 is really where you kind of decide which direction you're going to tackle. And not every innovation has to be earth-changing. It doesn't have to change the paradigm. It can just be simply a better, faster, cheaper way to do something. And so it's really at that step 2 where you decide the scope of what you're going to tackle. So one of our biggest success stories was at Michigan State in 2004. This guy, Dustin Diamond, used to play Screech Powers on this television show, Saved by the Bell. His life didn't go so well after Saved by the Bell, and he was hitting on hard times, trying his hand at being a stand-up comedian. Wasn't very good at that. And so we went and attended one of his shows. We had an idea that if we could get a picture of him with a shirt that we designed that morning, we made it the Bayside Tigers, which happened to be the fictional mascot for Bayside High School that Screech Powers was the fictional character, he attended that school. If we could get a picture with that, we thought would be successful. So we made the product the morning of, we took it to the club, we waited in line to get his autograph, we asked him if he'd put it on and take a picture. He said he would not put it on. We said, will you hold it? He said, okay, I'll hold it, but you got to pay me. I said, how much? He said, what do you got? Pulled out of my pocket a crinkled 10, a crinkled 5, and 3 crinkled 1s. Paid him $18. He took this picture here with the 2 guys who ran the company for me at the time. We went on to sell 15,000 of those T-shirts at $20 a pop. So my point in this is my formative years as a college student had this very short feedback cycle between when I could create a product, come up with an idea, try it, and get instant gratification or instant market reaction on how that product was being received. And so it's really through that sphere that I kind of gauged the world, and that really left an impression on me, because when in 2005, I was an ROTC cadet at Michigan State. Eventually, Uncle Sam wanted me to do something for the money he'd paid for school. So in 2005, I commissioned and joined the Air Force. Now, I joined the Air Force, and I didn't know what to think of the military. My dad had served in the National Guard for a little bit of time, but my family wasn't necessarily a military family. So I was really excited about these slogans like aim high, no one comes close. And I hadn't actually seen this ad at the time, but I think it's just comically tragic. Presenting technology that lets you program your own destiny. So in 2005, I commissioned. I went to Intel school. I got to my first assignment at Travis Air Force Base, and I began to program my own destiny. That right there is a 15-inch monitor, CRT monitor. That computer's running Windows XP. We had Microsoft Office, and my inbox had 50 megabytes of storage space, okay? So these were the tools I had to innovate, and these are the tools that I had to work with. And this was a challenge, right? I mean, right off the bat, this just didn't seem to live up to that expectation. And I didn't care so much for me, because I kind of, I had a good lot in life. I had lots of passive income. I had a college degree. But really, I think the tragic piece in all this is the commitment we were making to our airmen, right, and our young enlisted folks. We'd kind of suckered them in with this notion that they were going to make these career-changing advancements, and we didn't quite live up to that. So my job as an intel officer, I got assigned to an Air Mobility Command wing, right? And my job was to make sure that our pilots and the decision makers who ran our operations had the best information possible to assess risk at both the strategic level, geopolitically, but also kind of at the tactical level. And coming out of Intel school, you can get all sorts of really sexy assignments. You can go, young Intel officer go to the CIA, young Intel officer go to NSA. This wasn't the sexiest assignment, I'll tell you that. It was go to Travis Air Force Base, work with air mobility pilots, and share intel with them, tell them what you're going to do. But we took that commitment really seriously, right? I mean, in the Air Force, pilots are kind of that first-class citizen, right? That's what we do. Everybody else is in a support capacity. But we took that very seriously, and I took that commitment to those airmen who worked for me very seriously. But what happened is we started to look at the way we service these customers, right? How did we take care of these customers? And the challenge for us is that data was everywhere. It was extremely difficult for us to collate this data, all these national sources, all these tactical and leader-level sources, provide a cohesive picture to make ourselves happy customers. And they weren't unhappy in the sense that they called us and complained. They weren't happy in the sense they just didn't come see us. They didn't come to our vault because we weren't relevant and add value to their lives. And so the dynamic I kind of identified, or the problem we identified, is that, hey, these pilots had lots of sexy technology on their iPhone and on their GPS device as they drove to work, and then when they got there, vault door, we stepped them back 2 or 3 generations in that technology curve. We showed them some PDFs, maybe some physical charts. We just didn't seem to make ourselves relevant. So what we started doing, and it was over the course of 2 years, we found ways to synthesize that data. We ended up using Google Earth as a backdrop, brought all this data into Google Earth so we could create these very dynamic displays about where U.S. forces were operating, where threats were happening, where things were happening, where threats were relevant. And so kind of a low-level innovation in a sense, but we spent a lot of time cultivating this and got a lot of traction for it. People were very optimistic about the possibilities this held. It took a lot of championing. Okay, I had to be a champion. I don't know what the plural was there. So I spent a lot of time traveling, almost. I think what you heard today from Jeff and Jason and Tony is that it really requires that you have to have that champion, right? And you have to have grit, as we heard yesterday. And the problem is, in my opinion, again, my estimation, I burned out on this after a year and a half, but also the system shifted me away from this focus, because your performance review can say you created this awesome geospatial tool that changed the way we do business, but next year it better not say you created this awesome geospatial tool that changed the way we do business. And so naturally, I had to move on. I wanted to move on, but it really took a full-time champion to push this forward. So this at the time, served as revolutionary. It did some neat things, but I was kind of done with the Air Force and ready to move on to something else. So Mark Jacobson, we never met, but you have I've benefited greatly from all of your hard work. And my next gig when I jumped out of the Air Force is I landed at the Air Force Academy, where you had taken some code to link up Falcon View, PFPS with Google Earth. You had given that code to a research and development lab at the Air Force Academy, and I left active duty for 9 months as a contractor, kind of got to own that process, create this product up here called the Wedge Viewer. It was really fun. We got to, I kind of got to just maneuver, go around, talk to pilots, see what they wanted, write the requirements, and then work with the teams, get in the trenches with the developers who could put the bits and bytes together to make this a reality. And after 9 months, we had a minimum viable product. This is where I started to get disenfranchised, and I have the attention span of a small child, and so I need to move quickly. What happened to me is I just kind of got bored, because what happens in the military is that we have these long certification and accreditation processes. So even if you have great software, it's going to be months, more likely years, before that software gets in the hands of your end users. And so that whole iterative loop, right? The iterative loop that I've been very successful with in my life, the iterative loop that large companies like Google and Facebook and others implement, it just didn't seem to fit with the processes and the complex nature of the military-industrial bureaucracy. So I will tell you, earlier this year, Falcon View 4.2.2 finally has the Wedge Viewer with code that Mark Jacobson wrote, shipping on the disk, but it took 3.5 years, and I wasn't going to sit around and be there for that time, and I think that's a major flaw structurally that I don't know any of us as CGOs or any of us as kind of innovators can solve. I think those are the types of problems that are systemic and are broken to such a degree that it's going to take senior leader intervention, or it's going to take some sort of crisis as a catalyst to start to change these processes. So I step back now. I've been at Google 3.5 years. I get to do some really fun stuff with technology. As I look at this, and if you wanted Sean's assessment on what happened, it's that the Air Force didn't make that jump from the client-server paradigm to the cloud. We're still fighting wars, and we're still trying to do operations with a set of tools that was relevant maybe 10 years ago. And that's a big challenge. And what really keeps us there is technical debt, right? And it's something we don't talk about a lot, and it's something that's kind of obscure, but technical debt is literally the consequence of poor or evolving technologies, architectures, and software. It's all of the decisions that were made before us that we've now inherited. And this is a very serious problem, because jumping from one of these curves to the next, right, one of these performance curves, these highly technically drawn bell curves, it takes reinvention, and that is going to be a major challenge going forward. So, made me king for a day. How could I fix this? I don't know if I could, but here's what I think needs to happen, right? All data, we need a mandate. We need a mandate across the Department of Defense, and maybe this is the type of policy recommendation an organization like a Defense Entrepreneurs Forum could make. All data, all DoD authoritative systems need to have an application programming interface. What is an application programming interface? You've probably heard other people mention it this week. It's simply a way that one piece of software can programmatically talk to another piece of software. Tweet wall, right here. Owned by Twitter? No. Some asshole in Rhode Island wrote that. And the reason he could write that is because Twitter has an open API, an application programming interface. This guy said, hey, I got an idea. Go to these conferences. People want to see the tweets. Hey, I got an idea. I'll write a couple lines of code, and we can integrate those tweets. And I don't really think he's an asshole. I just think he beat us to the punch. We should have come up with that. Where were we on that? Could have made some money. But that's the power of an application programming interface. It federates the data, it gets the data out of silos, and it lets creative people start connecting ones and zeros to drive change. 2, we pay, as a military, a lot of money for something called the Foreign Language Proficiency Skills, or what are they called? Foreign Language Proficiency Pay. That's great. Gives us, as an organization, a strategic reserve of foreign language capability that we can tap into. We're paying a lot of money for people to know Polish and all sorts of crazy languages they may never use. We as an organization, the United States military, the government, needs to start paying for these technical skills in the same way they pay for foreign language proficiency. That is to say, if you have an airman or you have enlisted folk who work for you and they can write Python, they can write Objective-C, we need to pay them for those skills. Because increasingly what's happening is they're becoming less relevant in the workplace because we're not fostering this sort of skill growth. And we as an organization aren't able to tap into it. And so I think this is, again, a recommendation. This is nothing that we in this room can solve. But what we can do is we can advocate for this change at a very strategic level, at a senior level, to make these sorts of changes that will help the next generation of company grade officers coming in behind us to influence their organizations. I don't know what that third point up there meant. I mean, I don't know what I was talking about. Incubate, change at scale. What I really was trying to say there is, once we have this resource of skills, right? Once you have people in your organization who can write some code, guess what? Even if you don't write code, all of a sudden you get experience managing a project that produces some sort of software. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest eye-opening and frustrating experiences over the last 3.5 years is that Google gets about 75,000 resumes a week. 75,000 people a week want a job at Google, apply for a job at Google. A lot of those applications, those resumes come in from veterans. And VetNet, there's about 200 or 300 of us at Google who are veterans. Think about that, 40,000 person company, there's 300 people who are veterans. They end up, a lot of those resumes end up coming across our desk, right? For assessments on, hey, would this be a good fit for a particular role? And I'll tell you, 1 out of 100 times I see a veteran's resume who has the skills to actually get through the Google recruiting process. The Google recruiting process is kind of broken to begin with, but literally, our veterans don't have the skills to be competitive in Silicon Valley. And that's a big, broad statement. We could negotiate, we could have some dialogue on that, but I'm just telling you from my observation, that's a challenge. But if we start to make some of these systemic changes, that paradigm starts to shift. All of a sudden, we all get a little more exposure to technology, because I'll tell you, this technology isn't going anywhere. It's only going to become more ubiquitous and more ingrained in our lives. And I'll tell you what, the Vietnamese are doing a great job of building computer science and basic computative curriculum into their elementary school educations. Other parts of the world get this. They get that the world has shifted and that the world needs to become more complex. I'm a criminal justice major from Michigan State. I don't have a computer science degree, but I can sling code with the best of them, and that's what has helped me move forward. We need to as an organization, make a commitment to pay our airmen, to pay our enlisted folks, our company grade officers for these skills, and then we can start to live up to this expectation. Then they can start to make big changes inside of the DoD. Okay, cloud. So I landed at Google. It's been a great opportunity. I'll tell you the funniest thing though. I started at Google in May of 2010. A lot of generals like to come visit Google. They all love to do a victory lap through Silicon Valley. I'll tell you what's funny is it usually coincides with just before they go on terminal leave, before they get on terminal leave. But every once in a while, it's when they do a PCS, right? And they're going to take on a new job. They want to do a quick run through Silicon Valley. They want to talk to Apple, Google, all the thought leaders in the technology space. So I spend a lot of time, probably 4 times a month, meeting with the General Admiral, talking to them about Google, talking to them about our approach to innovation, our approach to technology. And what's really funny is, in May of 2010, well, let's back up a year from there. May of 2009, they wouldn't have cared what I had to say. I was just a dumb captain. Now, in May of 2010, all of a sudden, they give me their undivided attention, sit in a room, they actually listen to what I have to say about technology, and they even call me sir, which is kind of ironic. But I think that just, again, illustrates this odd dynamic we have in the military, where obviously rank and obviously position are very important. But at the same time, I didn't become a different person in the 12 months between when I was on active duty and when I was at Google. Actually, my recruitment process took about 12 months. It's just a different perspective. All of a sudden, when I wear jeans and a t-shirt and I'm on the Google campus riding some stupid little bike, then the general wants to know what I think about how he or she should store full motion video. They didn't care when I was a captain. And I'll tell you, Google, 72 hours of full motion video uploaded to YouTube every minute. 72 hours of full motion video uploaded to YouTube every minute. There are very few organizations in the world who have the technical architecture, the technical competencies to deal with that much data. And it's kind of funny when you read about how the Department of Defense is struggling with all this full motion video they're getting off of 60 or 70 drone sorties. This is just the world we live in. So a couple other things from the Google culture that I thought were interesting and insightful. Engineers at Google, product managers at Google, everybody is encouraged and given extra time, not really given extra time because we set our own schedules, but we're encouraged to take time to experiment, take time to tinker, take time to just try new things. How many of you use Gmail today? Gmail is the outgrowth of 2 Google engineers around a water cooler 7 years ago going, Microsoft Outlook is just a piece of shitty software. And so what they did is they wrote Gmail. And they started building internal advocacy, they started growing this platform, and today there's 600 million people who use Gmail around the world for their daily emails. I think there's a lesson in there about how we can culturally give our folks time to experiment, give our folks time to innovate. But if we're just giving them that time today without the right tools and the right skills to actually make a difference, that time's wasted. I'll tell you the key at Google, one is everything's an open application programming interface, so anybody can mash up Gmail and YouTube and they can come up with interesting ways to apply technology, and everybody has some level of technical competence to write some code and try some new things. Okay, so just one other point I want to make to you. Are all my slides off center? I don't know. That was centered when I started, or when I made the slide. Okay, I want to talk you through this concept of obfuscated complexity, okay? What's happening in our world, whether we like it or not, is really, really technical stuff has become very, very simple looking. So this picture right here is Google Street View. How many of you have used Google Street View? Okay, Google Street View, a project to collect high-resolution, ground-level imagery all over the world. Started, again, as one of these 20% projects, we call them. Just somebody innovating around Google. They've been working on Google Maps 4 days a week, and they decided, hey, 1 day a week, let's try to, how can we improve this mapping experience? So they put a camera on top of a bike rack, started driving around Mountain View in Palo Alto. Today, this program has now covered 15 million miles of road in 50 different countries. But that image, like if I want to show you the Boost School of Business, I load that image, that's 128, maybe 200 kilobytes of data that I just transferred across the mobile network. It's nothing, it's a simple picture, right? But it turns out there's a lot of complexity behind that image. Okay? That car right there is the hallmark of the Street View fleet. It's a Subaru Impreza. The mast on top of that car has 15 high-resolution cameras. Every 60 feet, that car is taking a 52-megapixel mosaic. That mast has 3 LiDAR sensors, so at any given millisecond, that car knows exactly what the terrain looks like in the X, Y, and Z axis around it. The car has 3 IMUs, 3 GPSs. It's collecting all of that data on a constant basis. And then it has odometrics on the wheels. So at any given point, we know how far forward or how far back those wheels have run, how far left or right those wheels have slewed. And all of that data is being pumped onto a hard drive. And at the end of the day, and this thing fills up like 3 terabyte hard drives 3 or 4 times a day, those hard drives are shipped back to a Google data center. And we take all of that data, we run through it with really complex algorithms, all to make sure that that stupid picture is in the right place when you do a search for the Booth School of Business. So the end user, like my mom, when she wants to see what the parking looks like in front of a Starbucks, she can pull up Street View and take a look. But increasingly, the level of engineering and the infrastructure to deliver this sort of experience is extremely complex. Just as a side note, Google's done lots of other projects recently. Now we're collecting trails, collecting internal maps as well. But this is the way these programs grow, and this is the way that they kind of indigenously expand. But you have to have the technical skills to get started down that road. And eventually what we end up with is the picture you saw there. Okay, a couple other thoughts. There's this interesting phenomenon in between the 10th and 17th century where people making maps would put these mythical creatures on places of the maps where they didn't know, they didn't really know what was there. They didn't have data. But largely it was to scare other people from going into that area, right? There were these map monsters. And what I really like about this map monster equation is that I think this is what happens in technology, is we hear things like the comm squadron saying, you can't publish that information due to an OPSEC violation. Don't go near that monster. It takes people who are going to challenge conventional wisdom, who are going to set sail in a different direction, and we're going to go find out if there's really some sort of giant sea serpent around that next corner. Just a couple other things on architecture I didn't mention. I don't think I mentioned in technical debt. Someday, if we all sat around today and we said, okay, we want to create an information technology network, and we want to make sure that only certain people have certain roles and certain privileges, certain rights. How many of you think we'd come up with something that looks like NIPRNet, SIPRNet, JWIX, NSANet, BICES? How many people? That's technical debt, right? The technical debt there is that we've inherited all these networks. How many of you have an iPad? If you put on that data protection feature of your iPad, it encrypts your data on the iPad at 256 bits with a 256-bit AES encryption algorithm. Guess what? That's the same encryption standard that CIPRNet uses. That's interesting. Would we even create a CIPRNet or JWICS today? No. And so that's the technical debt we can't overcome, right? And so that's almost just a different map. It's not even a monster. It's just the maps we have today don't make sense. And those are challenges that we as young, motivated individuals probably can't solve. It's going to take policy recommendations to our elected leaders, and it's going to take probably a come-to-Jesus moment with our senior leaders at some point when they realize the way we're running this organization is just incompatible with current standards for technology use in an enterprise. Okay, a couple other things. This always drives me nuts, and we talked about it here. The meaning of innovation has basically become useless because it's overused, right? This is a tweet, and I don't care about the guy who tweeted it. It's just one example. Grinds my gears, as Peter Griffin would say. So this was in March of this year. This guy, he says, hey, it's $1 million aerostat. It got a rip. They fixed it with $20 in tape. That's pretty cool. But they call it an innovation. And that, for me, again, that's that low level, kind of first tier of innovation. Is that truly innovative? So I always go back to this, right? And so in 1964, I always go back to pornography, and that's what I'm going to reference here. Pornography, why is it important? Because in 1964, this dude, Nico Jacobson, was in Ohio, and he wanted to show a movie. It turned out that movie had kind of a steamy sex scene. He ends up getting sued by the state of Ohio. And the Supreme Court has to define what pornography is, right? And so this guy, Potter Stewart up there, he basically says, I shall not today attempt further to define the kind of material I understand to be embraced within the shorthand description. He's talking about hardcore pornography, right? He says, and perhaps I'll never succeed in intelligently doing so. But I know what it is when I see it, and the motion picture involved in this case is not that. So I think we should all distill this down to Shawn Maday's recent adaptation, which is, I can no longer define innovation, but I know it when I see it, and this is not it. And I think if we hold ourselves to this standard, right, we should laud ingenuity. We should laud the people who take the next step. But we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back for an innovation that isn't truly a shift in the paradigm or a jump to that next curve of technology. That's all I want to talk to you about today. I hope I've pissed at least a few of you off. And I'm happy to sit around and take any questions or engage in any dialogue as you see fit. Sir?
You said that Googlers are encouraged to innovate, tinker, invent.
Yeah.
Do they still have Google time? Is there a formal way of doing that? Because I heard it had been abolished, but I could never quite find out what's true.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, internally, what's different about Google is that nobody punches in, right? There's no concept of an 8-hour workday. You work and you do your work, and you're encouraged to so it's nothing as formal as take 20% of your time or take Friday and do something innovative. But it's absolutely still encouraged. It's absolutely still done. Guys on my team are working on all sorts of crazy projects, some of which are going to be moonshots, some might make it, some may be destined for failure, but it's absolutely part of the corporate culture.
So it's acculturated, not formalized, not clocked.
Nothing is clocked.
Okay, so there's no way to measure whether you're doing too much or too little, but you look at the results.
Look at the results, follow the data, right? So you create, this new cool feature for YouTube, back it up with the data, then iterate on it, right? Then formalize it, then it becomes kind of part of somebody's portfolio of features. Sir?
In your opinion, do you think that innovative culture at Google would exist without the top echelon kind of pushing that down?
No, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, I think those people would exist somewhere else. What's interesting about Google is they have to provide this time to tinker because those motivated engineers will go somewhere else. They quite frankly have lots of options. And that's a challenge that when you contrast the US government or the military specifically and an organization like Google, one is Google gets to be very selective about the people they pick, right? 75,000 resumes a week, you can pick the cream of the crop. The other is that you got to keep those engineers interested and motivated. And Mr. Leibowitz, what was your last name? Yeah, you had spoke about this at great length, and I took some notes on your excellent lesson, but just about how you retain that leadership and how you retain that thought leadership in an organization. Those are challenges, fortunately, I don't have to solve, but I am downstream of them and get to live in that ecosystem where I can kind of play with whatever I want. Anybody else? Ma'am.
So Google is a big organization as well, so now you've got these great innovators over here that are spending time creating things. How does that move? How do those ideas move up the chain so that they can be
Yeah, so a lot of it is informal, informal forming of groups, right? It's a lot of just getting buy-in. You can have the coolest project in the world, but there are very few instances where somebody will say, engineer 1 and 2, go work on that project. You have to build that advocacy internally, right? So it's come up with a great idea, socialize it, maybe over lunch, maybe have a formal tech talk, maybe pitch a few of your friends and colleagues, but build that advocacy and get somebody to put some money behind it. So it's a big internal selling process. It's very interesting. Sir?
To your point, I was ADO at a Predator squadron. One of the interesting things that we had is I had a 2-striper who was fantastic at C++. He could code. I mean, excellent coder. I had a first lieutenant who was great at Google Earth, and one of the things that was fascinating is the stuff we had access to. We owned our side of the computers, but we couldn't touch the Predator platform itself. We were able to do crazy stuff for the warfighter, right? We were able to bring all kinds of resources there because I just let this first lieutenant and this 3-striper run wild, and they did amazing things. We were able to become basically phone a friend for our guys in the op, where we could access anything in IC. And then I'd have to go sit in an airplane that was run on 386, where the human factors engineering was so atrociously horrible. And one of the points that we would make is we're like, look, give me the GPC, I'll buy a top bullet, we'll put an emulator on here, and we'll fix this airplane. And I mean, year after year, we get stuff back from the SPOTA, which is garbage. I mean, just absolute trash. Where I'm like, my 3-striper can give you a better airplane than what we're getting paying top dollar for it. How do we fix that? How do we get into the acquisition system?
I mean, yeah, and I don't have any answer, right? I'm just one stupid dude who does his own thing. But a couple points on that, right? One, you described that iteration step in defense acquisition and defense software, government software in general. It's just the feedback loop is too long, right? I mean, it'd be if the OODA loop had a 18-month gap between when you observe and decide, and that just doesn't make sense. The other piece you mentioned is, mid-level managers will be really cautious about the kind of project you just described, because what happens when that one dude who knows C++ goes somewhere else? Because we don't do anything in our organization to cultivate those sorts of informal skills, and we don't do anything, so that could be the next facet of RallyPoint, right? Cool, I know what assignments you've done. What are your skills? Because maybe I want a guy who's got some really cool Objective-C experience because I want to write an iPad app, or I think an iOS app for my organization is the absolute best thing. It's those informal skills that the organization can do more to cultivate and actually surface. So, one more question, I'm told, or none. Sir?
Quick question. So you talked about it was kind of like a famous process within Google where they allow people to do things without fear of repercussion and creative. If such a thing was to happen in the military, you ultimately get a point where maybe people are like, let's do this. But then they have to push back and say, let's do a request for proposal, because of legal implications that I know you're really familiar with. So, I mean, I guess I have 2 quick questions. Would you almost say that it's impossible for the Department of Defense to actually reach a point where they can quickly do these types of things? And if not, do you think that it's actually the optimal outcome for lower level units to just be able to do their own kind of ideating, and then that's it, and then that's the best that we can do?
Yeah, I mean, so my opinion on that is if we're saying that the organization has become so rigid and inflexible that we can't actually implement new ideas in grassroots sorts of ways, I think that'll be kind of the prelude to the book about how the U.S. government collapsed, right? I mean, that's the fight we have to fight, is if we really become so rigid that we can be outmaneuvered in that sort of way, there's a big systemic problem afoot, and I don't have a solution for that. I agree with you. The government has to write requirements. The government has to worry about the life cycle of a project. There's probably just ways we can bring grassroots talent into that process to make an overall better product for the end user. So, anyway, thanks for your time. My approach was just to kind of be like a seagull, come in here, make a bunch of noise, shit all over everything, and I'm going to fly away. Have a good day.
All right, Sean, that was outstanding. Now we're going to break off into our final ideation sessions for about 2.5 hours. We'll meet back here at 17:30 or 17:15. But just to give you guys some focus as to what we're looking for. So yesterday we kind of narrowed down some of our ideas. For tomorrow, we're going to actually be presenting some of these ideas in front of the panel of 6 judges. So what are we looking for? Hopefully a 2 to 3 page white paper defining the problem, defining the question you're trying to create a solution for, defining who your customers are, and then finally what your solution is. Getting as much into the weeds as you think is necessary for a 5-minute pitch, but also for a broader presentation to hopefully carry it forward beyond DEF, or put it on the dev website to develop ideas. So how do you get it through to the appropriate people? Who are the people that are the stakeholders? How do you convince them that your idea is a good idea, et cetera, things like that. And if there are more questions about the scope of what we're looking for that deliverable, please come find me or talk to your facilitator. Next, some of the groups may not be ready to make that presentation. I think some of the groups have already folded. That's actually a good thing. Fail early, fail often. If that's the case and you're in one of those groups that kind of didn't make it through the first day, find another group to take part in and help them with the ideation process, or come back and think about lessons learned and present those to the group tomorrow as to how to make that process better going forward. And then finally, when we come back here at 17:15, we're going to do one last Sunday survey. So we'll have the website up here for you guys to take part in. Yesterday, 30 of you all gave us great feedback. We'd like a little bit more response, and one of the questions on this survey is going to be contact information and a way to get you guys linked in with each other after the conference. So we want to have this data, where you're coming from, different organizations, so we can link people up by regional areas, so you can continue these conversations afterwards. So please come back, fill out that survey, and we'll get that information to you after the conference. Following that, University of Chicago is hosting a happy hour for us up at the atrium. Food and drinks are on them, and more good conversation after that. Jeff, I think you had one more thing to say.
I just wanted to add the fact that I know some of you may have to actually leave before this conference is up. However, I wanted to invite you all to, if you're interested, become a blogger as part of this movement. This isn't just a conference; it's also a movement. So if you have something interesting to say, maybe a response to Sean where you think everything he said was garbage, I highly doubt it, but maybe that's what you think. We want an active discussion. We are not trying to say like this is the idea you have to have. We want ideas from all perspectives, and to have a really robust forum online for the sharing and spreading of ideas. Thanks. Come see me afterwards if you're interested in becoming a blogger.
All right, you guys are free to break to your groups. What's closer? 2?
It's like in the center.
Good. Okay.
Hey,
so for my group, we're moving rooms to the center console area.
Sweet. Awesome.
Thanks.
You got some way to contact you later on? Yeah. Let me. What I'll do right now is I'll send you an email. I ran out of cards, so no worries. But yeah, I'll send you an email. But we'd love to as much as you want. Shop volunteer. Yeah. Our requirements are really simple, like anywhere from 3 to 1,000 words, 300 to 1,000 words, and then just some kind of facial photo, and then at the same time like a 2 to 3 line bio of who you are. Got it. No problem. So awesome. Yeah. Cool. Sounds great. Yeah. What? So you're from RAND then?
Yeah, I work at RAND now. I used to be a Marine for 10 years.
Oh, cool.
So it's really dumb to way too smart.
How do you like working at RAND?
It's actually pretty good. It's kind of like it's got some Google-ish kind of aspects in that, like when we have projects to staff, it's done organically. The guy goes, the project leader that gets handed the project goes out and finds his friends and is like, hey, do you guys know anyone that can help me with this, and like the project seems to coalesce pretty naturally. Like, that's awesome. So it's very, very organic. The hierarchy is very flat. Like the CEO, he's the guy's like the CEO of RAND, right? And I had lunch with him the other day just because like he sat down in the cafeteria. Wow. And he's like, hey, I've seen you around. And no, it's really great.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. Are they in the Bay Area at all? Or?
No, unfortunately they're not. We have one guy that's making the drug policy. He's like the hot guy that I think he works at the Bay Area. Okay. I wonder why. But he does have to come down every once in a while. And they're really flexible with that. There's guys that are in San Diego. There's guys that are in Seattle, stuff like that. In Hong Kong, we got a couple guys there.
Oh, cool.
So, but I think those are. They've already made a name for themselves. They've already established that they've got some bonus release.
Right.
You guys like me, I'm actually in the grad school program.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the trenches. Right. I'm doing the optimizations and all that stuff. I'm cleaning the advocates like that. But I still get to interact with the projects on a high side. If I've got the connections and contacts and expertise. So it's a great thing. I mean, if that's something you're interested in, I'm always we're like the school I'm in. They're always interested in bringing more guys in with actual like a real world experience. A lot of the guys are economists, statisticians, and stuff like that. And they're bringing in more guys with some real experience.
That's cool. That's really cool, especially because I do whatever's necessary to get the job done. But I love trying to find the big picture of hey, is this that's the right vector? Or like,
well, they
seems
do,
like sometimes
they do high and they do low.
Yeah.
We do stuff like right now we're trying to figure out what the 82nd Airborne Global Response Force really means. That's like a high level task. And ground level, we're doing this thing where we're trying to figure out subterranean warfare and how you might actually what the command and control problems are that. So it's we do all sorts of crazy things.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome. I'll definitely shoot you an email. I'd love to get your perspective and there's so many people on, you have real world experience on the inside as well as the outside, and it's all about thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming forward. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for letting us. If it's locked up on us, the security guards. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, they have a tendency to fall off.